Okay, so I'm recording. So hi, I'm Sunny. We're here with Taboo Talk, which is the safe space to explore the edge of the status quo. And today we are exploring the edge of the status quo on masculine and feminine energy. We're getting a little woo-woo today. I have some really awesome guests, but before we go there, let me just remind you guys that the point here is not to convince anybody of anything. This is a really safe space. If you guys have questions, you can chat with us. When you're in the chat, if you have a question that you want us to answer, just put a / and a Q before it, and it'll show up to the left for us so we can address it as a question. But yeah, we would love to hear what you guys have to say and what you think. And I'm just going to go around and let you guys introduce yourselves. So Tim, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi.
What about yourself?
I am Tim Wade, and I've had a varied and sordid career in many different areas, not the least of which being a Disney Imagineer at one point in my life, and all sorts of other crazy things. But now I am empowerment and life coach mostly for men, although I do have some female clients as well. Do you want to know anything else?
I'm sure we'll learn more as we go. Bob and Natalie, you guys want to go next?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Bob. This is Natalie. We work around sex and relationships. We help singles and couples have epic sex lives and epic relationships. And we're a couple continuing to navigate the form of our relationship in a way that really allows the specialness and the magic of our connection to keep flowing and really keep expanding. So having this business, doing this coaching practice together is one way that happens, and we love doing it. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Also have very interesting past, Tim. I used to work in construction, which a lot of people don't know, and I have a business degree. So I've definitely got that side of my brain, and then I've got the woo side, Sunny, nice. And the magic side, and the let's talk about love side.
Awesome. Amber?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Amber Leeds, and I currently coach women around sensuality and embodiment. So really being able to use their sensuality to fall in love with their bodies and just kind of cultivate these really beautiful relationships with their entire selves through pleasure. And I also touch a lot on sacred sexuality in my work, and I'm really into tantra and jade eggs, and definitely masculine and feminine energy is a huge part of my work as well, and how I coach women.
Awesome. And then I'll just say, just to give some context for me, so I own a small business, I do strategy and whatnot, but the reason that I'm doing this is just because I tend to be a person who asks lots of questions, and decided to start doing it publicly and live because I'm weird like that. And the reason that this topic specifically excites me, because I am a woman. I'm very comfortable in my womanness, and I tend to be mistaken for a man a lot because I have short hair, and from behind, apparently, I look like a dude. And I'm a pretty aggressive woman. I'm a leader, and I'm pretty bold, and that often gets me into trouble in today's social norms. So I've kind of had a conversation about my masculine versus feminine energy going on for a long time. And it wasn't until probably the past 4 or 5 years in my spiritual journey that I started really kind of identifying that that's what was going on, and looking at how to embrace. Do I need to balance? Is it okay for me to be more masculine and still be a woman? Does that mean that I want to be there's so many conversations that can come with that conversation, right? So I've been in that space for a while, and kind of got comfortable with it a couple of years ago, and was talking to somebody about it not too long ago. And they were at a much earlier stage in the journey of thinking about the fact that people can have these different energies, and it just triggered it all again and got me thinking about it. So I'm excited to do this today. So to set the groundwork, I've got some articles I found. I have books that I've read. I have a couple of questions to ask you guys to prompt, but there's not an agenda. It's not it's not like interview style. It's just conversation style. I just want to kind of jam on everybody's experience and play off each other. I haven't had this many guests at once before. So this is going to be really, yeah, it is. I'm totally excited. It's perfect because next week I'm going to have even more because I'm going to have people in my house. So it's great practice for me.
I feel like you're all going to line up behind me, and we're just going to all try and.
Yes, my tiny house will be full. It'll be great. Got it. Yeah. So I guess to start with, when we talk about masculine versus feminine energy, and I'm purposely wording this vague. You guys can answer whatever works for you. Just because somebody answers it one way doesn't mean you have to answer it the same way. So when we talk about masculine versus feminine energy, what does that mean for you? Like specifically, when I say that, when you heard that this was what the talk was going to be about, like where did your brain go? What are some of the things that you guys came up with?
Well, I'll jump in.
Okay. Go
for it, Tim.
Go, Tim, go.
Go.
Go, Tim,
I
go.
think about this a lot, so and I write about it, and I'm very interested in specifically how men show up in the world, especially the way they show up, in the 21st century, and not how they showed up before. So when I thought of masculine energy, I'm wearing this shirt on purpose. This is my ampersand shirt because I don't feel that those energies are gender specific, both masculine and feminine per se. They tend to be, but they're not exclusively by any means. And so I thought immediately of the and of integrating both sides, not in a perfect,
awesome.
50-50 kind of thing. That's where I think it becomes really interesting, actually, is where there's a mix where you land comfortably, so to speak. And exploring that is really amazing.
I'll go next. Yeah, I agree with you, Tim. I definitely, when I heard that this talk was about masculine and feminine, I got really excited because that's a big part of my journey and a lot of women that I coach's journey. And just like everyone has their own kind of unique blend of masculine and feminine energy, and just the way that they're able to find their own kind of integration. I don't really say balance a lot personally. For myself, that word just doesn't feel that great. I prefer to think of like the masculine and feminine, and each of us is like these lovers, like making love, and there's just like this 1 minute you need to be more in your masculine, the next you need to be more in your feminine, and it is a huge journey to find where you reside each day in those energies, and like how you can successfully feel good in each energy. So I just think that we're coming into a stage now where we're learning that we need to integrate not just going into a more divine feminine state, but also allowing the divine masculine to come together. So we're not just getting all like feminist and, outcasting the masculine energy, because they're both integral to living and being.
Wow, you said a lot there, Amber. There was a lot of juicy stuff in there. Natalie, you look like you're about to jump off that, so I'll let you go.
Yeah. And I'm noticing the part of me that wants to be like, I agree with everyone, and I kind of want to say something different. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I personally have had a journey with it. Sometimes I felt like I understood what the hell masculine and feminine was. Sometimes I didn't. I'm actually in this place of questioning it all over again myself. But so I'll just preface with today in this moment, what I think about masculine and feminine is it's like the two sides of a coin. Like I think of the kind of yin and yang symbol, and that there's two sides and we need both sides. And there are two energies, like there's plus and negative and positive energy in like the world to make things happen. I'm not going to get all scientific because I don't know how to explain that part. But I just see it as these two energies in the world, and there's two energies that people kind of hold. And each energy does certain things. And so what I've kind of come to is like the feminine energy is that kind of flowy, very like about life and love and the warm and fuzzies and the nurturing qualities. And then the masculine energies has been more about, or again, what I'm kind of coming to is like the protectors and more of like a container. Like here's the glass is the masculine energy that holds everything, and the feminine is like the water inside that flows and does its like thing. And that the masculine is about kind of this pointed, direct structure kind of frame to it. And we need both. And so that's kind of what I've been coming to is like, they're just two sides of a coin, really.
And what I want to add on to that is that I think a lot of people in our community are well versed with the concept of masculine and feminine energy, but I know that when I was first being exposed to it, I had some resistance to the idea. And I know that there are people out in the world who get triggered by me or somebody else walking around and saying like masculine, there's so much masculine this and so much feminine that, and because it's like gender is such a loaded topic in the world, and so there's like the conversation around gender and sex is totally different thing, you know, like what physical bits you have or whether you identify as a man and a woman or a woman and a woman is a totally different conversation than let's talk about these kind of abstract frameworks for viewing ourselves and viewing our relationships and viewing the world. And that's what masculine and feminine energy are, is that they're age-old concepts that are, you know, go back to yin and yang, that are just ways of relating to life and relating to the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you guys just said a lot of really awesome stuff, and I want to unpack a lot of it because I think a lot of it could easily have gone over people's heads. Some of it went over my head, so I want to go back and unpack it. First, I want to just check in. I don't see a chat to the right at all. Am I the only one? Am I just having tech issues? Do you guys see a chat happening?
I see.
Where's the question box?
I see messages.
I see the question box on the left of my screen. There should be a chat option on the right where everybody who's watching us can chat and participate. Is that?
I just don't see.
It's just a black box.
I
It's
see
a white box.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I've been seeing people writing.
it tells us everybody who joined, and I see a couple.
Yeah, I don't see that. So I'm going to refresh my screen, which means that I might go away for a second and come back, but I want to be able to see that. So I'll be right back.
She's gone.
Gone.
No, what are we going to do?
We've lost our leader.
Oh, now we can really.
Now we can get wild. Hopefully
By
she
the way, I
comes
think
back.
you guys said some really amazing stuff. I'm glad that Sunny's going to, as she said, unpack some of it, because all three of you hit on some really amazing topics around. I like Amber, what you said about flow and not using the word balance.
Mm-hmm.
Or integration, I think was what you said, right?
Yeah,
Versus
like integration is kind of like, yeah, very flowing, but very much, I've never really cared for the word balance personally myself. If other people resonate with that, great. But I like integration, or just thinking of it as like, you know, the energies are like making love to each other. They're like dancing with each other. So there's very much this beautiful blending flow.
Yeah, I love the dance analogy too, for sure.
I'm gonna get back.
Oh, that was so weird because I could hear you guys talking, but I couldn't get my.
Good
Anyway.
thing we didn't say anything about you.
Yeah, I saw. I'll teach the way party. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes, you guys said so many cool things. I'm going to try to. We'll see if we can get to them all. So I guess the first thing that came up was the balance and the flow and some other more complicated stuff. But like for the purposes of viewers, I want to go like in a specific order. So the first thing that came to mind from making this accessible to people who maybe haven't dived into this conversation just yet was the idea of masculine and feminine going back to yin and yang and not necessarily being a man or a woman conversation. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So I think that when I hear somebody say like, "Oh, feminine energy," this is funny, but I think of Jan, the Muppet, the hippie Muppet that's in the band. That's like, "Oh my God, like everything's totally awesome," and she's like, "Oh, there's just too much feminine energy in here. I have to leave." But like to me, when people say that, at least the household I was raised in, that was like a hippie thing, and it was like super woo woo and super like, it was like something you kind of I associated with intangible stuff, and it was almost like a spiritual or a religious thing for people that because I didn't relate to, I couldn't relate to. So when you guys talk about like somebody having feminine energy or there being both masculine or feminine energy in the world, but then you say that it's not related to gender, can one of you make an attempt at explaining that?
And let me add one bit, and maybe if somebody else wants to explain from there, I do want to at least, I'm not a gender expert at all, but there is a distinction between sex and gender. Sex are the physical bits that you have, and gender is what you actually identify as. And as I'm sure all of us know, there are plenty of people in the world who have, say, a penis, but who identify as women, a transgendered woman. So
right, and that gets into gender roles. I mean, that's like getting into a whole. We could do a whole talk on just that, right? Yeah.
It's worth at least saying that, like, this is the context for that. There is that context in gender and sex. So
Yeah.
And here's a whole third arena to me, which is kind of more energetic. So do you want to keep?
Well, I loved what you were saying. Is you're giving distinctions between the energetics of masculine and feminine.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it's interesting too, because I think even before I knew much about it, I just remember growing up thinking, like, the way that I would think of it, it was like, I'm a tomboy and I'm very like a dude when it comes to like the way I approach business and the way I approach kind of like studying in school and things like that. And so it was that thing of, I didn't have a way to kind of explain it, but the more I learned, it was this energy of that kind of, again, that structure, very pointed, very that energy. And we need both. So like a lot of times, like the way I'll use business, because again, like it gets kind of like racy when we talk about sex and relationships, but like just in the form of business, like there's multiple ways to approach business. Like there's the energy of being more inviting and kind of making things enticing and warm, and just kind of being a little bit more intuitive when making decisions, and kind of thinking about more like the community and just kind of flowing and really being open to change. Or the masculine way, which is like very like, I have a plan and I have a strategy and I have timelines and we're going to do this and we're going to have, you know, our strat plan and action plan, and just very like direct and pointed and schedules. And I go after the thing and I like grab it, and very direct. And so like that's,
which you basically just described me.
Right. And that's the thing, like for a long time, that was how I operated in life, in business. Like I had a very masculine, again, like from the energy perspective of how I approached business and school and all of that stuff. And it's interesting that I've now kind of shifted into more of this kind of like, I just flow, and like, what is my intuition saying today? And, you know, and just really being open to letting things kind of come, like allowing things to happen versus making shit happen, which I think to me is a really big distinction in those energies. Around the feminine is like, I just allow things to happen and I'm just kind of flowing with it, versus the masculine, which is I make shit happen. I got a plan and I'm going to go do it, and I'm going to get it, and it's going to get done.
And I want to speak a little bit to why it's useful to make these distinctions. It's not that one is better than the other.
Right.
It's simply that, for instance, in my business, I've been doing a lot of work actually to get really clear on what's my style. What's the way that I create my business that is fun for me and that's actually in flow for me, where it doesn't feel like I'm constantly having to put in a whole bunch of work to get minimal or
like the hustle,
marginal results. Yeah, so like I'm not interested in having a business where I'm having to like make shit happen constantly, where I'm having to put a bunch of energy in, where I feel exhausted at the end of every day. I want to feel energized and lit up. And so if I'm aware of if my business building and my enrollment style, and again, you know, Natalie's using the area of business, but the analogy could easily be translated to any other part of our lives. But if I'm in tune with how I create my business, and if I've got a more masculine style or a more feminine style, or maybe in certain areas it's masculine, certain areas it's feminine, if I'm in touch with that and I'm in tune with that and I create from that place, my life is going to be a lot easier. My business is going to be funner. It's going to be more successful. And I'm just going to be happier.
It's interesting that you guys are... It's interesting that you guys continue to go back to the idea of like making shit happen being masculine, because that's actually like my catchphrase, I guess you could say, in my business, is that I help people make shit happen.
Yeah.
And I tend to work with women who are so in their feminine flow of things, where they let... And so when I was doing the research for this talk, a lot of what I came up with were like keywords for masculinity versus keywords for femininity. So for like masculinity, it was hard. It was actually death. It was aggressive. It was leader. It was taking control, versus feminine was soft, life, flow, like nurturing, mothering type things. And what I tend to do in my business is I help people who are more in their feminine flow infuse a little bit of masculine energy into it. It's not something I can necessarily say from a business perspective, but that's a lot of what I do, right? But I think it's interesting, though, that in our society, we've definitely got, everything's very binary, right? And so when we're even like now, as we're talking about it, it's almost like that's why the title of the talk is Versus, because that seems to be how we talk about it in society. And I know that all of us here I think are all fairly well balanced or in the flow or whatnot. We don't see it that way, but society doesn't really make that an accessible conversation.
Right.
In society, it's very much still, broadly at least, either or. It's masculine or it's feminine.
And not only that,
it's very binary. And I don't know, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. I'll leave it at that and let you guys respond.
Well, not only that, since the women's movement came out of the 60s, there was a backlash against 50s style masculinity or male, which was very stoic and, not open, not receptive, the macho kind of thing. And they really there was a great point. Men did have to become more sensitive. But then I think the pendulum swung really far for some people, some guys, to the other extreme of being passive and soft, which also wasn't necessarily the optimum thing. So any polarity like that you're saying binary kind of becomes not workable. You know what I mean? It was the same thing in the 50s, the housewife who would vacuum with pearls and a house coat or a house dress, like on Leave It to Beaver. It was this uber feminine thing, right? I started using the words energy instead of masculinity and femininity because of the idea that it just felt better for me to be able to access both. And I think that there's lots of things that are attached to those words, like a lot of masculinity has gotten a bad rap, like aggressive becomes dominating or violent, for example. Feminine, has often been like, well, that's the way it should be. You know what I mean? And stop being so dominating, and stop making war. Men make war, and men have made it.
I love the excuse me. I love the introduction to The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida, and he talks a little bit about the impact that feminism has had on society and how, like, there's what you're speaking to there, Tim, is like, if we try to balance it out, then we create this neutrality, is kind of what I got out of it. And so if everything's become really neutral and everybody's trying to like have one foot in each pond, so to speak, then there's no friction and there's nobody's a leader. Everybody's afraid to lead. Like, I'm afraid I'm a leader naturally it's in my personality, right? But I'm afraid to do that because then I'm being too masculine. But then, like, women leaders, it's like, if we're a woman, we lead, we get in trouble for being bossy. And if you're a man and you lead, you're like too aggressive. And it's like, it's kind of created this weird space for everybody, I think.
Well, I think about it in terms of energy. Energy is how things happen in the world. And if you have, say, a rubber band and they're both in this side of the masculine, this side's the feminine, and you put them both close to each other and you say that guys should be more like ladies and that ladies should be more like guys, everybody ends up kind of in the middle. There's no tension. There's no energy. There's a floppy rubber band, and nothing can happen with a floppy rubber band, really. It just dangles there. But if you take these points...
I'm so tweeting that.
Floppy rubber bands, guys. No one wants a floppy rubber band.
You honor the masculine and the feminine energies, and you decide to show up. This person decides to show up very in their feminine, this person decides to show up very in their masculine. All of a sudden, between these 2 points, these two people, you've got potential energy, and you can do and create a lot with that. There's a pull from one toward the other. There might be sexual charge between two people or creative charge between two people, and it's basically like this. The contrast between masculine and feminine is what allows for potential energy to be created, and then how we choose to express that and what gets created in the world or in our relationships because of that potential energy is our choice.
So I really
I
love
think that's
David
really
Data's
nice.
work because he always talks about the polarities of between the energies. And like, if you can imagine, if everything was perfectly balanced, there would, like you said, it would just be like a floppy rubber band. There would be absolutely no contrast and none of that like beautiful tension that allows us to kind of grow into a new space and find relationships, like not just sexual relationships, but when you meet people who kind of bring the opposite energy that you've been needing, and they're there to kind of help you bring yourself into swinging the other side of the pendulum. So it's not really like, I like what you said, Tim, about the pendulum, because it makes more sense to think that it's always constantly swinging in whatever way it needs to be in order for you to really live a life where you're actually honoring yourself and you're not, because if you're too much in your masculine, especially as it relates to business, like masculine is very much about doing and penetrating and linear and going out, and feminine is very much about receiving and being intuitive and going inward. So if you are constantly in your masculine, you're going to exhaust yourself, and if you're constantly in your feminine, you'll probably just lie around and daydream all the time and you won't get anything done. It's very much about doing versus being, and knowing when you need to be doing and when you need to be being, and having that beautiful, and it's a journey. Like there are days where you won't really know what you need to be in until you sit down and you think about it and you let yourself explore and play with it. And it's kind of the curious way of going about it is to ask yourself, like, what do I really need right now? Like, what do I need to be doing, or what do I need to be being, or how do I need to be being? And letting yourself have the space to play and explore with the energies and kind of let them run in their own natural way beautifully.
You know, Amber, you said this thing about balance, and I was thinking about this about a month ago, and I had this image in my head of scales, you know, like that's what balance is. And it just wasn't working. I was just like, this isn't it. And I don't know if anybody listening or any of you guys scuba dive ever, but when you scuba dive, you have to, okay, Bob, you scuba dive. Okay, you know that you have to have a mixture of gases. Like we don't breathe oxygen. We actually breathe oxygen, nitrogen, and some other argon and stuff. And you have to adjust the mix based on what's going on. And I felt like for me, that was a better metaphor of my energy, whether feminine or masculine, is that I adjust the mix. Is that like, it's interesting, as you go deeper and the pressure gets more, you have to actually add nitrogen, you know, and so it's as if there's times when I feel like, oh, well, I'm going to have to add in more feminine here to deal with this particular thing. It's like what you were saying, Amber, or wait, I got to bring on the masculine thing because, you know, in space they have to raise the oxygen level, for example, because there's less pressure, you know. So it's all of those kind of things that aren't a perfect equilibrium, and not something also that I think people get cemented into a position. This is who I am. I'm this. And there's so much more fluidity, I think we're finding, in all sorts of ways, not just personality, gender, sexuality, all of those, right?
So to kind of piggyback off of that, Tim, because my latest question with all of this, and Bob and I were on a hike recently, and I was kind of throwing that out there, is this concept of kind of like what our essence is, you know, what, and it goes a little bit with nature and nurture and personality versus choice, etc. And so is there such a thing as having, you know, our true essence? Like my true essence is feminine, but I can tap into that masculine in certain situations, or I might, as a friend of mine said, false project masculine, like because I'm so masculine in my business, like I show up masculine in my relationships.
Well, I'm so
like
glad you brought that up.
That energy, right? And so kind of this place of where is this line? Well, I'm curious where everyone lies in that of, is there such a thing as like our true essence versus it's all a choice in the energy that we're tapping into and how we're using that energy to be in the different parts of our life, you know, because if it is energy, is it like choice, person, like what we're kind of given, a combo of both?
Right. That's a great question. I can just say from my own experience, I chose a strong woman who has a highly developed masculine energy. That's how I would describe it these days. before I used to say, "Oh, you're in man mode." You're in man mode now, and it was literally 6 months ago, and I was on a call with someone, and I suddenly went, "Wait a minute, what if?" And I have often been accused of having a highly developed feminine side.
Accused?
What's that?
Accused?
Accused.
Yes,
Accused?
It's been pointed out to me.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
And quite honestly, it's caused some problems in our relationship. And I thought for a minute, what if where we have landed right now in our way we're negotiating with each other is actually an adaptation. It's an overcompensation. The dance we're doing now is basically, I'll say, I wasn't stepping up as much in my get it done energy, let's say, my masculine, pointy, penetrating energy. So Barb felt the onus on her to step up in that area. And it's not something she did really, really consciously, I don't think. And I also think it's something she brought to the relationship just like I did. And it just sort of, it's probably one of the reasons we picked each other to kind of work that out. And we are in the process even now of shifting how we both show up in the relationship. And I've noticed that as I, whatever you want to call it, step up, she exhales and relaxes and becomes more that round energy. Because I really do think it's pointy and round. And guys out there, if you know what it's like when a woman relaxes, like in sex, it's the best. It's the place you want. You don't want, us guys can kind of be almost hyper vigilant and still, make love to someone. Women get lost in this way. I sometimes am envious of how lost women can get, and I think men can get there. I'm sure Barb has a lot to say about this, but it's been a wonderful thing to see her shoulders go down, see her go, oh, okay, all right, you're holding down your end of the teeter-totter. That's good.
Awesome. That's awesome. There's a lot of beautiful, juicy stuff in what you're sharing here, Tim. Thanks for sharing all of it.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's been interesting.
I didn't really answer
her
question.
For me, the idea of that's okay.
Ellie's question. Yeah, that's
we just let the conversation flow. But I think it's still a valid question. So going back, it was basically what you asked, Natalie, was like, is it an essence? Is it fluid? Like, how do you know if you have a true essence, or is it always changing? And I think for me, what rings true is that it's a choice, and that you have to, like, it's a choice to honor, right? And I don't know yet, like, I'm still on my journey. I don't know if there's something in me that I eventually will uncover, like all the layers of the onion will be gone, and I'll uncover something that is true and just is, or if what I'm choosing to honor as I go day by day is what's true in the moment. Like, I don't know yet for me. But I do feel very grounded in my choice day to day. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, it was a very uncomfortable space for me. For me, doing a lot of reading and researching and talking about it and being willing to acknowledge and honor what was happening was really important for me to get to the point and to where I recognize there is both masculine and feminine in me, that it's not an either or, there's an and to Tim's shirt. And I love what Amber said too about what am I doing versus what am I being? Because a lot of times what I'm doing is that pointy energy, and what I'm being is that round energy. And sometimes I'm doing and being at the same time. In fact, I'm always doing and being at the same time. And I get to choose how much of one or the other shows up, right? But you've got to take the first step to become aware of all of that before you can choose and honor, I think. I feel like there's probably a lot Amber could add to all of this, though, and she's just being polite and letting us all talk. What do you got going on over there, Amber?
Well, things are brewing in my little head.
Yeah.
No, that all, and I actually am still trying to figure this all out myself in regards to, like, I use the word essence a lot in my work, but it's not in the masculine structure where it's a label for anyone to put on themselves or to label their energy of any sort, their masculine or their feminine energy. But for me, I I notice that there are conscious choices that I make to be in a specific energy, and there are also subconscious choices of me either being in an energy or not being in energy, probably because of past wounds stemming from like, you know, childhood that have to do with those energies. So it's just like, for me, it's trying to find this place where I'm consciously choosing to heal a specific energy, or to look at that energy and try to heal that within myself and be able to accept it in other people in my life as well. And then noticing where I have like really deep wounds, rejecting or clinging to one of the energies. So that's been a huge journey for me, especially with the masculine energy, and trying to like feel safe with that energy, not only in my own body and in my life and in my business, but being safe around masculine energy in others, regardless of their gender.
Yeah, I want to build off that just a little bit to make it a little bit more like tangible, because I followed what you said, but it was a little existential for some, I think. So let me, if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. So I had an abusive relationship when I was in my late teens. And if I look at like the timeline of my life, I was really feminine in childhood. I was a gymnast, I was a cheerleader, like I was pretty girly in my early teenage years. And then I had this abusive relationship, and there's almost a direct correlation to the amping up of my masculine energy, right? And it's now, looking back in hindsight, my mid-30s self can totally see that that was my teenage self reacting and looking to heal and to compensate and to protect and preserve, right? So it's like there are absolutely examples where I think what you were saying, Amber, is that you have like a wound where it's holding on to an energy. And so for me, the way I look at that is like, there's a version of myself that's still 17 and trying to protect myself from somebody who's trying to hurt me. And that's not okay, right? So the way that my immediate reaction is, if they can use masculine energy to dominate me, well, I'm going to up that so people can't dominate me.
Yeah.
But if I stay in that heightened state, that's not going to do me much good either, right? So learning how to ease into more of a flow, I think.
That's kind of what I mean by an adaptation, you know, an overcompensation that comes out of a wound, you know?
Yeah. And I actually noticed that one of my biggest wounds with the masculine energy comes from, you know, being a young girl and having a really overbearing father. So I perceived him at that age as, you know, masculine, because that's how I was conditioned. So growing up, and now until recently, as I started to look at what's masculine and what's feminine in my life, is I was always trying to keep the masculine at a distance, because I didn't want that overprotective, overbearing kind of energy that I perceived to be masculine in my life. So I was kind of just like making business choices that were very like floaty and feminine. I wasn't really getting a lot of work done at first, and so much more than just business, but in life. But yeah, it was definitely pinpointed to a moment in childhood where I saw this masculine energy from my father as being this overbearing, overprotecting, and I wanted to reject that energy later on in my life, until I actually was able to see the triggers and see the wounds and do the work to forgive myself and forgive my father, and see that he was just doing the best, and, you know, now be able to accept that energy in my life and in my business and everything that I do.
Well, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old daughter, and I'm keenly aware that they're watching me, and they've been since they could, you know, where they were born, and saying, okay, that's what a man is. And I know that I'm modeling for them, and I took it as a really big responsibility. And so that's very meaningful what you have to say, Amber, that I'm hoping that, you know, because I know that the good thing I do is that I do have this feminine side, so I get to be very affectionate with them. I tell them I love them every day. I'm not distant. They love to cuddle with me, and I can also be strong, but not domineering. You know, and hopefully then that will carry over into their lives, and they will not take that any sort of behavior from another man. It'll be like, no, that's not right. You don't get to whatever, boss me around or be distant.
Because what I hear you saying, Tim, is kind of
I think a lot of what we...
Go ahead, Sunny.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just wanting to kind of parse that out a bit too for for folks of just kind of like healthy versus unhealthy versions of energy, because I think that's the other thing that I've been realizing too, is just like anything, you know, there's like, so there's two sides to the coin of the coin. I know that's weird, but that masculine part, right, where like the healthy part to me would be the kind of container that makes you feel safe and it's solid and it's strong. But then there's the other side of like aggressive and at all costs, and, you know, just the place where it's actually doing harm and not good. And then the same thing kind of with that feminine energy too, of like too much, like Amber was talking about, like you're so flowy that you're like floating off into space and you're not like on this like planet. But then the healthy version being like really in tune, really like intuitive, very sensitive to the things happening around you, and kind of being able to flow and navigate from that. And so I'm kind of hearing both of you talking about that healthy and unhealthy version of these energies too, and trying to find like, I'm going to say the word balance, but a balanced kind of place around them too.
You know what? One of
a healthy point.
Yeah, I mean it's great. One of the downsides on feminine, I know we've been talking a lot about masculinity, but what I've noticed with my wife is the feminine, let's say shadow side, is I don't want my kids to grow up. I want them to stay little all the time, and that's not what is going to be healthy for them. But that's the you know, not as healthy or not as evolved, let's say, version of the feminine energy. It's like being very, very protective and mom mode kind of thing.
Over-mothering.
Yeah, over-mothering, right?
Yeah. I've also noticed that, well, at least with my feminine energy and what I've witnessed in some other women is the shadow side of the feminine can be very manipulative, in the sense that in order to receive from the masculine, we tend to manipulate in order to receive what we perceive that we need to get. So that's definitely something that I've done a lot of curious exploration around with myself, is seeing when I'm getting into that shadow feminine side and trying to manipulate things instead of naturally get intuitive and receive and allow the masculine to be a sacred container, like you said, Natalie, that is supporting me, and instead trying to manipulate it into my existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
I want to bounce over and try to just want to acknowledge we've got a question over here.
yes.
And it's kind of a little off topic at this point, but I also don't want to leave him hanging. So his question is, does race and dateability fall into the dichotomy? I feel like I'm undateable because of the feminine stereotype of Asian men. I've never heard of Asian men being stereotyped as female. So I don't know that I can directly answer that question, but I don't know. Do you guys feel like there's like, we could probably talk about it on a more broad perspective of like, are women today conditioned to want to date a masculine man by like very traditional descriptors?
It's a good question.
I think that.
You know, yeah, I mean, I think so too. I mean, you just see a lot of the stuff that I've seen circulating online, and it doesn't even really mean anything, but you just see like all these like burly men with like the man beards and everything, and like I can chop wood and stuff, and like that's the kind of like when I talk with women, and I'm just like, you know, what kind of man are you like wanting to receive in your life? And it's just a lot of the men who would perhaps consider themselves to be very in tune with their feminine, they tend to get put to the wayside for men who are really dialed into that masculine energy, but I'm not sure if they're in a healthy masculine or if they're just in kind of like that very direct energy where they don't really, you know, take the time to be in their feminine. So I think that's a really good question. And I think that women today are really conditioned to kind of use the masculinity as a judge to receive a partner, to get a partner, is looking for those very manly qualities of this guy can take care of me, this man can save me, this man can provide for me, this man can protect me, and you know, like those typical female roles from way back in the day, like when women were susceptible to being in those relationships.
I feel like I feel like we've kind of gotten, like, I'm speaking for women now. I feel like women, I'll just say we have kind of gotten a bit two-faced about it, though, because it's like, on the one hand, we want the burly man who's going to take care of us. But then when we actually get into a relationship, we're like, why don't you understand me? And we're just like, you're supposed to be sensitive, have conversations with me. We want to be balanced. And I don't want you to be the breadwinner. I want to be able to have a job, and I don't want to have to stay home with the kids. So it's like, it's a very, I understand why it's confusing for men to navigate. It's confusing for women, too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just got on the soapbox.
That's the whole. Amber, you say you don't like using the word balance, and a word that I love using instead is choice. That's where being at choice comes into play, where I've done enough of my own personal work that I have access to my masculine qualities, and I also have access to my feminine qualities. I can show up in the bedroom and I can be a leader, and I can like gaze into my woman's eyes and just make her melt and start making her pussy wet. I can also show up in a conversation that we're having and really tap into my feminine side, be really in touch with my emotions. And I can share that I feel hurt, and I can cry, and I can express anger. You know, I'm not going to point it at her, but I can express anger and hurt. And I can be at choice around how I want to express in every given moment. Ideally, you know, as much as possible.
You know what you're talking about here, Bob, too, is freedom.
Yeah.
You know, you really have a freedom around your expression as opposed to being locked into one way. That kind of choice, that kind of access gives you such a range of experiencing the vitality of life.
Yeah. So I can show up like
I think
I can show up with the energy of Mr. Gray if I choose to, and then I can also have a really connecting, nurturing conversation with my partner.
Yeah.
I think at the core of that, though, I think in order for most people to be able to have that choice and that freedom, there's a step that comes earlier on where there has to be a certain amount of self-awareness cultivated to be able to be aware of, I'm going to be masculine in the bedroom and choose to be a little bit more feminine when we do our builds. So let's get into resources a little bit. Where would you suggest somebody start, especially if somebody feels like they maybe appear more feminine and they want to like become aware of that and choose to step more into their masculine in the dating game? Where would you guys suggest that people start if they want to kind of research that and be able to choose?
I think the resources are totally different depending on whether you're a guy or a lady, or at least they're going to be things that are really targeted. Way of the Superior Man by David Data is a book that I think is great for everybody. And then if you're a guy, a resource that is extraordinarily useful and is available all over the country and I believe all over the world is the Mankind Project.
Right.
And the Mankind Project is they've run, I think, 50,000 men through their weekend program since the 80s. And they bring a lot of emotional fluency and emotional awareness, and they teach that to the guys. And they also really teach masculine structures like accountability and integrity. And they do really deep emotional work, and they help guys get in touch with themselves and stop just playing out rigid patterns.
There's also a book that I just happen to have right here because I'm rereading it, and it was published quite a long time ago, actually, but it's called Iron John by Robert Bly. And it's a book for men, is what it says right there. And it's a pretty cool book because it's really building on Joseph Campbell's myth work, which I can't say, and about the same kind of issues of what has been lost in men becoming, going too soft. Where is the fierce, kind of take on life, take the bull by the horns kind of part of you? The wild man is what he calls it. So that's another one you might want to take a look at.
You ladies have any more female-oriented suggestions?
Yeah, I have two. Two of my favorite books that I know are a lot of they're like the Bibles for a lot of women that I know. Women Who Run with the Wolves, and it really takes femininity and defines it in a totally new way, which I really admire about that book. There's so many different stories in there about femininity and not just having it be the way that a lot of us probably perceive femininity to be. And I also love the book Awakening Shakti by Sally Compton. It's more goddess-based, but I still like the energy that she brings in the book. It's a really amazing book for women. And, you know, if men are interested in reading that too, it's just a good resource.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For me, I definitely read The Way of the Superior Man, and that was kind of my one of them. But Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts was really great for me to kind of play with that like femininity kind of piece. And also I've been doing a lot of work with this organization called Celebration of Being, because they're all about the beingness. But they have various workshops, and the one for women, it really looks at all of the archetypes of women, and which was great because it talks about, you know, there's so many different facets to it, and some of them are really kind of like what would be considered gnarly and probably masculine, like Kali, who's like the destroyer, you know. And they also have workshops where it's men attending and women holding space, so that there's work being done between the two, and then women attending and men holding space, so that there's also the work being done between those two. And I think it's just a really beautiful way of both sides seeing and honoring all the different facets of both.
Awesome.
I've
been reading Dear Lover by David Deida.
That's on my list.
Which is, it's interesting because there are parts of it, like I'm reading it with a really good friend of mine, a partner of mine. We're reading it to each other at night. And it's interesting because there's multiple times where I have to pause and ask him, do men actually think like this? Like this, girls don't think like this, boys think like this. Like it's very good. So Dear Lover is written by David Deida, and it's from a man to a woman with the intention of explaining to a woman how a man relates to making love. And it gets very graphic. It's, if you get squeamish around words about body parts, you don't want to read it. But it's really interesting. We're about halfway through. And I don't know, there's parts of it where I'm like, I call bullshit. And there's other parts where I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't know, it's been really interesting for me. And I know too, I've got a lot of friends who I would say are fairly self-aware and active in this conversation that we're having right now, that have all, a few that have done work with the Enneagram. I have not personally, but that seems to be a good starting point for people who want to kind of dig into becoming aware and thinking about choosing their energies as well.
Well, but even with that, like
so
that,
the last thing that I had on my list,
essence versus like how you show up, and you can choose. So it was, because I'm starting to explore the whole Enneagram thing too, and I'm like, this is so intricate and it's really interesting. I'm curious. Like I definitely really want to dive in some more to that too.
Well, I think, Natalie,
I've done some like really surface level work. I haven't dug in at all.
I've done quite a bit of work on Enneagram stuff, and it is interesting because I think it's an and. What you're asking, Natalie, is that it's a created thing, and yet perhaps there is an essence that you come into the world with, where you feel most grounded or most alive or most joyful, and so it's paradoxical in that way, you know, in the sense that as any aspect of life, you are creating who you are. At the same time, you show up with, I don't know, my kids came into the world with stuff. It was so obvious. You know, I couldn't believe if for them, you know, I could never not believe that they didn't come in with a personality and even an agenda, for that matter. So in that sense, the authenticity is a discovery and an invention at the same time. And you get to decide, and you get a lot of choice, and then you get to say, how's that feel? Oh yeah, I really light up when I'm like this, or I show up like this, or, you know.
Yeah.
And by the way, David Deida is very controversial, which is why I like him. So even if anyone does read him, know that there are people who really polarize around him and that's great because he makes you think.
Yeah, I love his work.
Yeah.
It's provocatory, and he explicitly says that at the beginning of The Way of the Superior Man. He goes, I'm illustrating principles in this book. I'm not describing how you should be.
Yeah.
There's another woman. Her name is...
and
Oh, sorry. I just, I have to throw her out there because I think she's hilarious. Dr. Pat Allen. She wrote like something about getting to do, and she's been a therapist in the like marriage and family.
She's nuts, and she's awesome.
She's so awesome. She's like in her 80s, but she has very, very like strong opinions. And I think and again, it's that thing of like when we have strong opinions and where we're taking a stand, people are either going to be on board and be like, hallelujah, I'm going to follow that flag you're waving, or they're going to be like, burn it down, you know? And she does have a lot of things to say around the masculine and feminine stuff too.
Yeah, she really does.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's for anybody who's wanting to kind of take a step into the journey of becoming self-aware and choosing and looking at masculine versus their feminine, you have to read books that you don't agree with. Like sometimes you have to understand the opposing viewpoint and read or talk to people who you don't agree with in order to let that kind of poke at your brain juices a bit. So if you only go and pick up books for people that support your view that you currently have, you're never going to expand your view. So yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so
spoken by the Taboo Talk leader.
Exactly. Enter Taboo Talk. And this is a great place to start. That's why I host these, because I feel like it gives people a safe way to kind of start dipping their toes into something that they're maybe a little less than comfortable with, because they can watch and be anonymous and all that fun stuff. So that's also why I like to share resources. And also, guys, if you go to tabootalk.us, tabootalk.us, you can plug in your email and I'll email you a link to all of the resources that we're talking about, resources that these guys sent me before we got on the phone, all the things I came up with in my research. And I will only email you about Taboo Talk. I'm not going to tell you anything, and you can unsubscribe and all that fun stuff. So tabootalk.us. I had one thing on my list that we haven't hit on yet that I want to kind of stir the pot on before we wrap up. And I'll give you guys a chance to speak up if there's things you wanted to hit on that we haven't yet too. There's this whole so I tend to surround myself with people who are pretty self-aware, that are pretty in the conversation of constantly expanding their world. And in my circles, there's a lot of talk about this whole notion of the feminine awakening and how masculine energy has dominated the planet for hundreds of thousands of years, and the feminine energy is about to take over, and it's about time. And I have my own opinions on that, but I'd love to hear what if you guys have had that conversation around you, if you have an opinion on that conversation. I figured Amber would. So yeah, and go.
Okay. Well, my thoughts on this, and I actually just talked with someone the other day about just the whole waves of feminism and everything, and way back in Atlantis and that kind of stuff too. Those kinds of topics came up, but it was just right now we're in a very patriarchal society, and I like to think of it again, kind of like how you said, Tim, it's a pendulum. So I don't know if necessarily. I don't think that our planet can be saved by being solely in one energy. We need to have that integration of both. So if we have a solely feminine, we are awakening to a more feminine way of being, but we are also, when we're doing that, we're having everyone also awaken to that divine masculine energy of actually being able to do from a healthy place and to leave the shadows of both sides kind of behind and start stepping into the integrated version of both together, because we do need both within us and on our planet awakened fully as a collective and as individuals in order for our planet to really thrive and do more than just survive, but to be rebuilt and replenished. So I think that we're all awakening to this feminine energy because it's been suppressed so heavily. So there may be a period of time, I honestly don't know, there may be a period of time where we're more in the feminine, and then we start to realize, okay, this isn't working either. We need to start swinging back to the other side. So I don't know if that's, going to be a progressive thing, or if it's just this balance dance that we're all going to find ourselves in for the next how many ever years. But I personally just don't think that we can awaken to only one and live in a space from only one being more dominant than the other. It has to be a flow, and it might just be that for the rest of however long this planet and lifetime is, that we just kind of keep going back and forth between them. That's just my thought and feeling on it.
I like what you're saying about we're not going to be able to do it with one or the other, and that that connection and saying we're more the same than we are different as human beings. And so the less that we polarize and say and faction off into, you know, all of these different little tribes like we have for so long, I do think that's where the planet needs to head. And we're going to, both men and women, or masculine and feminine, however you want to put it, are going to have to bring their best gifts to the table and say, this is what I can give. And it doesn't negate what you bring. It should enhance both sides. And I love the fact that the goddess energy is not the angry. It seems to me that a lot of the feminism that came out of the 60s was kind of angry and almost masculine-ish, you know, in a strange way. It was like, we're the feminine movement and we're going to be masculine.
Ironically.
It's like, that doesn't make any sense. So that's my 3.5 cents.
This is I want to throw kind of an abstract concept into to maybe frame this a little bit, but a mentor of mine said this past weekend, he's like, the feminine wins every time. Feminine always kicks my ass. And this is apparent in nature as well. You know, feminine is movement and it's change. And stasis doesn't exist in nature. He says maybe a black hole. A black hole maybe wins in terms of masculine in all of the universe. But feminine always wins. Movement always wins. And yes, one can't exist without the other. It's just, it's not in nature. It's not possible. It doesn't exist.
I think to throw my 2 cents on top of all of this, I think that when people have that conversation, it's based on societal definitions of masculine and feminine. So when people say the feminine is taking over, I think it's what we as a society have embraced as being feminine. Mostly, realistically, a lot of those ideals are coming from the post-war revolution in the 50s. But just the idea of being more nurturing and being more flowing, and you know, the whole millennial and hipster movement towards wanting to be more sustainable and caring about the earth and caring about other people, like all of those are very much round. They're not pointy, right? But yeah, I think a lot of the conversation around feminine energy taking over is really based more in a predefined, societally determined idea of what feminine is. And I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying as far as it's about choice, it's about a balance, it's about a flow, it's about making sure the pendulum either keeps swinging or lands somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but, about feminine kicking your ass, you know, we all start out feminine in terms of gender. The fetus is
interesting point.
Female to begin with, and then with
dun 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 in the chat room.
You know, I was like, nice, Dahlia.
And without intervention, that's the direction it goes. It starts like that. Then, of course, you know, the chromosome comes in, which is contributed by the woman, by the way, which I think is fascinating on a spiritual level. The woman determines whether it's going to be male or female. And this extra chromosome comes in, you know, the X chromosome, which one is the male? I can't remember, X, I guess. And then a certain number, you end up, you know, going sideways kind of and becoming men. So, yeah, I can see how the feminine energy is also very life-giving.
It is life.
And men are discovering how to not be life-threatening or destroying, and be their own version of life-giving. And it'll be different than what women bring. That's my
I'd love to, because I think, Sunny, what I was hearing you say. Oh, just really quickly, the kind of what I heard in that question was kind of that patriarchy versus matriarchy, kind of like the feminine awakening is in response to patriarchy, and then feminism and all of that. Like I do agree with you. I think it is very much like social conversations, and like everything, right? Like that also is very black and white. That also is like politics. You know, we're either Democrat.
And it's a reaction to something. It's not creating something. It's reacting.
Yeah. Where's the range and where's the kind of collaboration, and that there are multiple facets like in between. But like, so, and the nature conversation, I was thinking about that piece of a river, and that's another way, like I've heard masculine and feminine described, like the river, the water is the feminine, and the banks on the river is the masculine, kind of containing the river. And when there's no banks, it's like water just flowing everywhere, and there's a flood. And if there's too much, then it's a dam, and then it's getting stagnant, and there's no flow. And so it's kind of that piece of, again, like harmony is the word I keep coming to with a lot of this stuff. Like if everything is working together, like nature is very harmonious, right? Like everyone kind of has their everything, all the pieces have their, the parts they play to kind of have harmony there. And obviously as human beings, we have choice, which is also like the cool thing, that we get to choose our roles and choose the way we show up and choose the energy we have. Just throw that into the bag of mix. But harmony is what I keep kind of coming to with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, harmony feels like a good word for me. It's much better than balance. Harmony feels good in my body.
What is your aversion? What is your aversion to balance? If you would just share.
For me, balance, just like in my structure, whenever I thought about achieving balance in anything in my life, I actually found myself going into masculine overdrive. For me, it's how I define the word balance for myself. And just like a lot of the women that I work with who are aiming for balance are actually overworking themselves, trying to achieve something that, and it may just even be what they define, not so much the word balance, but what their ideals are of achieving balance is actually out of harmony. So for me, I think it's just a personal preference for myself, is that I just don't usually use the word, and it just doesn't feel that great for me when I use it anyways. It's not really a word that I use a lot.
Gotcha. There's a lot of words that society tends to use in one way that are maybe intended another, and you got to be kind of careful about. So it sounds like for you and the work that you do, balance is one of those words.
Yeah, I think it's just about a conscious choice, I guess.
What I heard in your language, Amber, it sounded like balance is something that you feel like you need to make happen. It's something that you need to do, and kind of almost there's like almost force is a word that I heard behind your language.
Yeah, and that's very much the energy that has always kind of shown up for me in like my own healing work that I've done with, and I've asked myself that question, like, why do you not like this word balance? And it's very much about trying to force myself to achieve something that, just isn't meant to be in that moment, because whatever I'm experiencing right now is my level of balance or harmony in my body.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe you were just an acrobat in a former life.
Perhaps. You never know.
Fell to your death from the high one.
So you never know. We've covered a lot of stuff. And we've kind of deep dived into some stuff and taken it back a bit on others. Are there like corners of this subject? I mean, we can always keep going, right? We could start getting into gender roles and into dating and politics, and right, that's why there's so many taboo talks that happens every week. But for specifically focusing on just kind of the masculine and feminine energy, are there corners of this topic that you guys were hoping we'd get into that we haven't, or anything that you want to kind of go back to and expand on?
Good question.
Feels pretty complete for me.
I feel like I can watch Natalie replaying it in her head.
I kind of am. I literally am. Like, and we did this, and then we talked about this, and then so-and-so brought this up, and then, we covered that one. I think it's complete.
What? I have a request, actually. Tim, I've heard you talk a little bit about masculinity and how it was defined and how you would love to see it defined. I heard you talk about it when we were in Puerto Rico together last year. And you have not really gotten on that soapbox yet. And I would kind of like to give you permission to get on it for a minute.
I was hoping to sing the Lumberjack song by Monty Python, actually. I can get on a soapbox. I'm going to try not to. Just sum up, or basically, I think that there's been, a lot of guys grew up with an extreme, and a lot of especially in my generation, there were a lot of guys who were, those macho, shitheads, that is what they grew up with. I didn't grow up with that, actually, strangely enough. I really had the opposite. I had a very loving, gentle man. He was also very passive, though. So my mom took on the role of being the ball buster. Again, it's that out of balance. I said the word, Amber. I'm sorry. It's that extreme pendulum swing, let's put it that way, of one or the other. And so my vision of men stepping up in the 21st century is about, first and foremost, being authentic, and being able to access their masculine strength without being a dick, and not being afraid of it. Because I think there's guys who are afraid of that they would become a jerk, or they wouldn't know how to deal with it. Also, I believe there's men who can learn to be more vulnerable. And I've said a lot that I think vulnerability is the most courageous thing that I've ever practiced. So if you think it's weakness, which a lot of guys do, I don't know that you've really done it. Because my definition of vulnerability is to show up honestly and authentically without the promise of a good outcome. So it's showing up as yourself and not knowing I may get rejected, I may get torn down, I may get disagreed with, all sorts of things could happen. I may get embraced. I don't know, but I'm willing to take the risk to be courageous and show who I am. So does that kind of answer your question?
Awesome. Yeah. It does. Thank you. And just to kind of keep the pendulum swinging in a not balanced, some other word way. I want to give you, Amber, the same opportunity. Do you have a soapbox around women stepping into their femininity that you want to kind of hop on for a second here?
That's a good question.
Well, I know you specifically do work with women around their spirituality and sexuality and that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there's an angle there we haven't touched on yet either.
Yeah. Well, in the work that I do, it's very much based on, sensuality and sacred sexuality, and feminine energy comes in there a lot too, just because so many women that I know are in masculine energy overdrive, or they don't know how to properly trust having masculine in their lives. So I really like the approach of like the goddess energy and everything. Not to be in like a super feminist way, like goddess only or anything like that. Like I like goddess energy. But I think that there's a certain beauty that comes with being able to, most importantly in regards to feminine energy, that I think a lot of women struggle with, is receiving everything, especially when it comes to receiving pleasure and surrendering and trusting and feeling safe, which all really comes down to the feminine energy and being able to trust your intuition and trust your body and trust the energies, not just masculine and feminine, but the sexual energies, the sensual energies, all those energies inside of us. So for me, I really am passionate about feminine energy in the sense of being able to receive and surrender and trust fully. So it's a big part of my work and my own journey too.
I love you said that a few times, that women have to get to a point where they can trust masculine energy and welcome it in and be willing to receive. And I think that's a really important.
And men have to be
thing that a lot of. And yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Exactly. Going back to the soapbox that I jumped on earlier about that dichotomy. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Any last words, Natalie and Bob? I don't want to assume you guys don't have your own soapbox.
I mean, I have a bunch of soapboxes.
I was like, Bob's got a bunch of soapboxes.
There are none that are very alive.
You want to pile them all up and pick the top one?
No.
Well, Bob, you and I have talked about somewhat men being a container that creates a safe space. And it's funny because it's kind of opposite of the pointy metaphor, but that men's strength can create a container where that gives those parameters, like the banks of the river you were saying, Natalie, that men can have a ability to be a rock not an island, that's not good, but a rock, when they need to be, so that women feel like if they need to kind of flow my wife goes into a vortex sometimes, and I realize that I can make sure she doesn't fall off the edge, that I have that ability because we're made up differently, we emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're there.
Yeah.
Tim's like, I got Bob's
Yeah,
soapbox.
you can just get my I'm kind of tired. Getting over a cold.
And I think I do.
Well, now that Tim covered Bob's angle for him.
Right. I actually do want to bring something up. Is I think my soapbox comes from stigmas, and because I heard various words, and even kind of I saw some of the chats there too around, men being accused of being feminine or women being accused of being masculine, and this way that's not okay, that there's something wrong with that that because you're a dude you should be masculine, and because you're a lady you should be feminine, and really kind of going back to that choice place, like that's a button that gets pushed for me, where I'm like, hi, there's no preference, there's no right or wrong, there's no one is better than the other. It just is. It's just energy. And if someone really owns and claims that shit for themselves, like, I'm a masculine lady, I am a feminine dude, and like Tim said, we usually attract our opposites to kind of create balance. We do, because, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You could have two like really masculine energy kind of people and two feminine energy kind of people. But that's why we talk in energies, because like in like homosexual relationships I've seen, like there's usually one that's a little bit more of like having that feminine energy, and there's one that maybe has a little bit more of that masculine energy. It kind of creates that kind of tension and polarity we were talking about earlier. But my big thing is about just kind of owning who you are, being unapologetic for it, realizing the gift it is, and then how cool it is when you're with somebody that is such a compliment to you, and the gifts you both get to bring, like both of you bringing your gifts in, and what a cool symbiosis that is. And you can change. I have the right to change my mind too, and just kind of that from that place like that. So that's my soapbox.
I'm glad you brought that up about the LGBT community, because that, I think, that explains how it's not gender oriented.
That's how it made sense for me when I first learned. I was like, oh my God, I do see that in couples. Like, it doesn't matter what their like gender is. Like one usually has one energy that's kind of the opposite and complementary to someone else's energy. And that's usually, again, it's never an extreme situation or something that's universal, but usually that's the case. And that's why they kind of like do that like yin and yang dance together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yay.
All right, we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yay for soapboxes. Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you guys so much for your time. Again, if you go to tabootalk.us, you can sign up with your email address, and I'll send out an email that'll give you all the resources that we covered today, as well as everybody's handles and their websites and all that fun stuff. It'll also remind you of upcoming ones. So I do Taboo Talk live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Next week, we're talking about sexuality, which is going to get very hot and juicy and interesting. So hopefully you guys will all come back and watch, because I will have all new guests, and it's going to be awesome. So yeah, thank you guys so much for taking time out to play with me, Tim, Amber, Natalie, and Bob. I appreciate it.
Thanks, honey.
And I'll see everybody else next week.
Bye.
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 Have a good night.
You too.
We just